you always known that you're on a soul path? And have you wondered how to gain real insight into the steps along your own unique journey? Welcome everyone, I'm Sarah Main, and thank you for joining me on Damayanti, the show for your soul. It's great to have you join me. Damayanti means deep peace and calm. Damayanti sheds a light for your soul through the gift of wisdom that shines in the beautiful and universal language of Sanskrit. Damayanti is the show that speaks to your soul, connects with your soul, and enriches your soul. Welcome everyone. Welcome along to Damayanti, the show for your soul, with me, Sarah Main. And today I'm going to be talking about the power of listening. That's right, folks. The power of listening. It is a skill and it can be learned, practiced, and mastered. Very important one, and pays huge dividends as it leads to understanding, empathy, and knowledge and wisdom. So listening is it's a magical doorway, actually. It opens up a space. So true listening, the power of listening. Why do we need to do this? So I love this quote from the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama said, "When you talk, you're only repeating what you already know. If you listen, you may learn something new." Isn't that great? When you talk, you're only repeating something. When you talk, you're only repeating what you already know. If you listen, you may learn something new. And then there's a beautiful quote it's around, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. The quieter you become, the more you can hear. And that was certainly something I was taught when I was young by my wisdom teachers. The quieter you become, the more you can hear. Another reason to learn to be inwardly still. And Stephen Covey, the late great sort of teacher of, the 7 Habits of Successful People and other things, he said, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Now that's an important description, because I was taught, he's packaged that in a very succinct way. I was taught long before Stephen Covey was on the scene that we're, to be aware of having one ear on one thing, and say someone's talking, you've got one ear on someone talking, and you've got one ear on your thoughts, often the thoughts of what you're going to say in response. Or you're not listening to the person at all, and you're only thinking about what you're going to say in response. So most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. There's a lot in that. And Richard Branson said, lead by listening. To be a good leader, you have to be a great listener. Lead by listening. To be a good leader, you have to be a great listener. So there are some really sort of telltale bits of gems of wisdom in that about the power of listening. Really successful people know this. They understand this. They do less talking and more listening. So if they're in a high-level board meeting, they'll be the ones saying very little, and they'll be listening the whole time. And they'll be hearing what was said and what was not said. Interesting. They'll be hearing what was said and what was not said. And this is one that I heard when I was young. I think I was only about 10 years old, and I just really liked it. It's by Lao Tzu, and it's from the Tao Te Ching, and he said, "He who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know." Think about that in terms of really successful people or great leaders. They say very little. What they say has impact. They do more listening than they do speaking. So the wisdom traditions around the world address the importance of listening, right? And they do that, and they address also the need for being careful about speech, but they address the importance of listening. And to do that requires being present and sometimes restraining the urge to speak. Think of what Stephen Covey said, that most people listen with the intent to reply rather than with the intent to understand. And sometimes we need, the wisdom traditions are encouraging us to be present and restrain that urge to speak over people, to speak all the time, to speak without restraint, blurting things out constantly, it just goes on and on. So there's a lot of, in the various wisdom traditions, about the discipline of inner restraint, particularly of speech. All right. In Proverbs, in the Bible, actually, Proverbs 13, it says, whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. See, it's in all the traditions. And Calvin Coolidge, who was the 30th US president, he said, no man ever listened himself out of a job. I thought that was just gold. No man ever listened himself out of a job. That's fantastic. So going to Sanskrit, right, let's just look at this concept of inner restraint, because that is not, I would venture to say, not a hooray concept these days. People are very antsy about sort of repression and all that sort of stuff, and fair enough. But there is definitely a strength, and a necessary strength, and a necessary discipline of inner restraint. And it's usually restraining those inner weaknesses that we have. So in Sanskrit, inner restraint and control, the Sanskrit word is dhamma. And dhamma means taming or subduing, self-command. You like that word, self-command, self-restraint, self-control. Not being controlled outside, being controlled from within, self-restraint, self-command, self-control. That is incredibly strong. And Sanskrit, the words come from root forms, like seed forms, and dhamma comes from the root dham. And dham means to be tamed, to subdue, and to conquer. So think about conquering weaknesses, all right? And even deeper truth to dham is in being calm and tranquil, or being inwardly tame, as it were. That's where real restraint comes in. So it's not like tough inner restraint. It's in that the strength of inner stillness, inner calmness, inner poise, inner equanimity is real self-command, real self-restraint, and real self-control. And that is not repression. That's like pulling the arrow string, not the bow string back before you're firing an arrow. The further you pull it back, the more energy is built up. So when the arrow is released, it travels with greater energy and straightness directly to its target. So from that inner calmness and tranquility and equanimity, that's not just sort of chilling out, man. That's poise and equanimity and being present. And in that calmness and restraint of the weaknesses, we've pulled the bow string back. And so when we do speak, it has much more power, much more directness, much more intent. And that's the real use of speech, the power of speech that a human being has, rather than it just being dissipated in a whole lot of superficial chat. So this derivation of Sanskrit for dhamma, inner control, is the very derivation of the Sanskrit name Damayanti, comes from Dhamma. And Damayanti brings peace and calm. Damayanti nurtures that inner restraint. Damayanti provides tranquility and patience. And this is the doorway to wisdom. the pathway to growing in wisdom. So in peace and tranquility and calmness, we can listen and truly hear. In peace and tranquility and calmness, we can listen and truly hear. So think of these really successful people. They can sit in a meeting, and rather than sort of bottling up and they've got things to say, they're completely calm, they're alert, they're awake, aware, they're present, and they're listening, and they're open, right? They're not filtering what's being said by their own prejudices. They're listening, okay? So think about that. Think about Proverbs saying, whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. And I thought about this. I remembered this when I was thinking about this show about listening. The famous speech in Shakespeare's play Hamlet, Polonius's famous speech to his son Laertes as Laertes is leaving on a journey. One part of the speech is, give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. That means listen to everyone, but don't dissipate your energy through just constant talking. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. And then there's an anonymous quote. It's often misattributed to Shakespeare, but it isn't Shakespeare. And he goes through life, his mouth open and his mind closed. And he goes through life, his mouth open and his mind closed. I thought that was great. And also Shakespeare in King Lear, he says, have more than you show and speak less than you know. All right, because remember, he who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know. So speaking and listening go hand in hand, in fact. So to speak and to listen more deliberately and more powerfully, and then to use the power of speech deliberately and powerfully, does require this inner restraint. And that's why I talked about Dhamma and Dham, and that is the derivation of Damayanti. And it was one of the reasons I was so drawn to that name for this show and my platform and the website, Damayanti. So the quieter you become, the more you can hear. And in this peace and tranquility and calmness, we can listen and truly, truly hear. The world is giving you answers each day. Learn to listen. The world is giving you answers each day. Learn to listen. And I would say the universe is giving you answers each day. Learn to listen. And this is something I was taught from a very young age, and it is so powerful. You need to be awake and aware, but it's so powerful. Okay, we're going to stop and take a break. And after the break, I'm going to carry on opening this up a bit more and give you a practice that is incredibly powerful, one that came from my wise teachers. And I'll pass it on to you to try in your life and discover the power of listening. We'll be back soon. Hi everyone, welcome back to Damayanti, the show for your soul. And today's show is on the power of listening. And before the break, I was just talking about the incredible power of listening. And rather than speaking, we think speech is an incredibly powerful tool, but the even more powerful tool is speaking. Tool is probably the wrong word. It diminishes it. The faculty, the power of listening is even greater than the power of speech. And if the listening can inform the speech, like pulling the bow string back before you fire the arrow, the further you pull it back, the greater power and energy and direction and straightness the arrow will travel towards the target. Speech that comes from proper listening is far more powerful than a lot of chat and constant speech that just covers the situation, often with confusion, a sort of a blanket of confusion and noise. And really successful people know this. I mean, just take Richard Branson's quote that I read before the break: lead by listening. To be a good leader, you have to be a great listener. And there's lots and lots of examples of, top executives and successful people, when they're giving advice on leadership and on success, I'll talk about listening. And this was great. In researching this show today, I honestly, I hadn't tweaked this, and I thought, I wish I'd known this when I was back in the classroom. Kids would have loved this. But the word listen, Listen, and the word silent, Silent, are spelt with the exact same letters. Hey, how about that? I thought, yeah. Listen and silent are spelt with the same letters. I want to go and find out if there's a connection there. But anyway, I digress. So the world, or the universe, is giving you answers each day. Learn to listen. And the quieter you become, the more you can hear. So I just keep saying that so that we just stop for a moment and really think, okay, listening. Well, what does it mean to listen? Because these days we're encouraged to voice our opinions and views all the time, much more than just a few decades ago. We're constantly being asked for feedback on everything. Fine, but hotel stay, a purchase, an app experience, anything and everything, you're getting some feedback form, right? Literally everything. So I understand a few things, good business practice, all that. You need that sort of reflection, customer voice. I get it. But it never seems to stop. You're just being hounded all the time. And we're encouraged to be honest. Great, also fine, not a problem. But unfortunately, without care and discernment and some inner self-restraint and inner self-command, this can just lead to a sort of a blah, and it becomes a barrage of negative speech, right? And this can form a habit, this habit of negative speech. And social media, unfortunately, is rife with it. I mean, I'm aware of social media channels run by women, and these are women, married wives with kids, they're mothers, they're wives and mothers, and they're innocently posting about their daily life. They often have living in rural situations, but not necessarily. Some are in the city, right? They're just wives and mothers innocently posting about their daily life and their faith, different religions, different faiths. And they're cooking and their recipes and their kids, etc., etc. And the attacks they get by people calling into question and criticizing them. And these people are offering freely their content, right? And it's also a way for some of them to earn some money. But the attacks they get, that's because of this habit of just blaring out negative speech without any inner restraint. Well, that has an effect. The women receiving it don't like it. The content creators don't like it. They talk about how it hurts, and it does, because speech is a form of fire and energy, and it can harm. And think of fire, if you think of speech as fire, a form of fire, energetic fire, fire can warm and light, and it can also burn and destroy. And you need the discernment. You need that inner restraint, inner command, inner self-control, because just blaring out negative speech is weakness. It comes from weakness. So you need to practice. You need to become inwardly strong. And that starts with listening, right? Not bottling up, listening. So sure, there's things to say, but think about the arrow being pulled back on the bow and then firing it with greater accuracy and energy and directness. That's not just blaring out, firing off stuff all over the place. That's with purpose, with discernment. And that takes that inner restraint, that Dhamma, That's where Damayanti comes from, that inner restraint. And then you have power and purpose. And that comes from listening as well. Okay. So, of course, in the right context, there's nothing wrong with a full and frank discussion and an exchange of robust views, robust conversation and discussion, full and frank over issues and matters where there can be mutual respect and we're listening to each other's divergent views. And in fact, this is really important to do. But this is where we're listening fully. We're listening to different views. And that is an act of respect in itself, to listen to someone you totally disagree with, but you're fully open to where they're coming from, the views, how they got there. But that is an act of respect. And it's actually important to hear contrary views. If we only ever hear people who agree with us, we don't grow, we don't hone our views, our things that we believe in. If we don't hear different views, it's like sharpening something. We need to actually have that friction. If it's smooth all the way, we're actually inwardly, mentally, intellectually weak. So it's important to hear these contrary views. And that's how we clarify what we really believe and what's important to us. And we can also respect other people's equally valid views and perspectives. It's essential training and discipline for the mind and for reason. When I was doing coach training early on, and I'd already been teaching for many years, one of the trainers said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That's the ratio of talking to listening. Twice as much listening as speaking. And I was already teaching at the time, and I went straight back to the kids and I said, guess what I've just learned? Isn't this brilliant? We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That's the ratio of speaking to listening. Twice as much listening as speaking. And do we do that every day? We live in a very visual world. We'll believe it when we see it. But is there a difference between hearing and listening? We hear lots of information and noise and music and everything all day. But when we really listen, we hear something that registers, and it's beyond the superficial. It has an effect. We hear, we have an aha moment. You know, the penny drops, the light goes on, a light bulb moment. We need to listen properly in order to hear, right? And hearing is connected to intuition. And it's important to learn to trust our intuition. It's important to be inwardly quiet and still so intuition is clear. Listening is the basis of true and proper communication, listening within and without. So when we were coach training, when I was coach training, we were taught about active listening, and that was essential when I had my executive coach practice, to actively listen. When I was teaching, bringing to bear proper listening and teaching the children to listen through singing, fine music and sounds, just to listen, listening to each other as they spoke. And this was a mark of respect. Listening with both ears. So this is the practice. This is the essential act of listening, is to listen with both ears. Listen with both ears. And this means being open and inwardly still, allowing any inner comments and judgments, anything to pass and not to give them any attention. And when we listen with both ears, there is a space. And in that space, knowledge arises. And that space is universal. It's a connection to yourself, to the unified field, to the undivided, to the quantum, to God. And that space is anything but void and empty. That space is full, not chaotically full, noisily full. It's full and abundant of everything. All the knowledge is there just as it's needed. Okay? And our coach trainers said that when we're listening to a client speak, in that space, that's where the magic arises. That's where the magic happens. And you know exactly what to say, but you need to be present and listen. Remember what Stephen Covey said, most people do not listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. And if you listen, it pulls you into the current moment, and there's always something new and exciting and endlessly fascinating in that. Okay, so real listening opens up that space, and that's where the magic happens. So final point, final practice, practice listening with both ears. Every day, practice that. Pick one moment and practice listening with both ears, and let all inner comments, judgments, views, let it pass and come back to being still, calm, and listening with both ears. If you want to know more about Damayanti, go to my website, damayanti.store, and I'd love you to do that. Cruise around. There's some beautiful Sanskrit jewelry like this pendant I'm wearing that's got Satya written on it in beautiful Sanskrit lettering. And that Satya means truth. And you can learn about the other 8 Sanskrit mantras that I've got: jewelry, necklaces, pendants, bangles. And they're all on my website, damayanti.store. And you can also be inspired. There's a whole podcast archive there of my shows. There's a blog. You can get my book. So go to my website, damayanti.store. And I've really appreciated having you along today and listening and learning and appreciating and thinking more deeply and connecting with your soul. And to finish, here's a beautiful prayer in Sanskrit. May all be happy. May all be without disease. May all see only good auspicious things, and none be in misery of any sort. May peace and peace and peace be everywhere. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashantu, Ma Kashchidu Kabhag Bhavet. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you for spending time with me on Damayanti, the show for your soul. To find out more about Damayanti, or to get my book, Conscious Confidence, Use the Wisdom of Sanskrit to Find Clarity and Success, or to purchase my range of beautiful spiritual jewelry, go to my website, damayanti.store. That's damayanti.store. See you next time.